If you wish to avoid losing a loved one, the witch doctor said, his voice dropping to a whisper, you must give up your own soul. That is the price of breaking the pact. Udo was unaware of the danger that loomed. In his dreams, he saw his son, smiling, reaching out to him. But the dream was short-lived. The warmth he felt began to fade, replaced by a creeping coldness that seeped into his bones. In the spirit realm, the voices began to rise, dark and accusing, pulling Udo into a place he couldn't escape. But he was still unaware, lost in a slumber that had come too soon. As the clock struck 3 a.m., the village remained quiet, unaware of the battle Udo was about to face. His fate and that of his family now hung in the balance, teetering on the edge of a choice that no man should ever have to make. Udo tried to move, to get away from the shadows, but his feet were stuck, as if rooted to the ground. He looked around, heart pounding in his chest, but there was no escape, just more darkness, more shadows. Then, the whispers grew louder, clearer. They were voices, many voices, all speaking at once, accusing him, reminding him of the pact he had made. You broke the promise, one voice hissed, its tone like the crackling of dry leaves. You fell asleep when you were supposed to stay awake. Another voice, deeper and colder, followed. The deal was clear. Now, a soul must be taken as payment. Udo's mind raced. He had fallen asleep, just for a moment, just 2 minutes before 3 a.m. That was all it took. Now the spirits were here to collect what was owed. His eyes darted around the darkness, trying to find a way out, trying to think of something to say. The words wouldn't come. Then the shadows began to shift, pulling together to form a tall, dark figure in front of him. Figure had no face, just a void where eyes should have been, and it seemed to grow taller, more menacing with each passing second. You must choose, the figure said, its voice echoing inside Udo's head. Your son's life, or your own? The words hit Udo like a blow to the chest. His son, his only son, who had just been born. He had waited so long for this child, his pride and joy. How could he give him up? But the spirits were not asking, they were demanding. Fear was paralyzing, but Udo couldn't let them take his son. He had to think of something, anything, to save him. I can't give up my son, Udo stammered, his voice trembling. Please take my youngest daughter instead. Spare my son, and take her. There was a moment of silence, a silence that felt heavier than anything Udo had ever known. Then the shadows began to stir, the voices rising again, louder this time, angrier. No. The figure bellowed, shaking the very ground Udo stood on. Pact was broken. The first violation must be paid with the life of a male. Your daughter's soul is not enough. Udo's heart sank. Figure's words echoed in his mind, each one like a hammer driving nails into his chest. His son was the price, the only price they would accept. But how could he do it? How could he give up the life of the child he had prayed for, the child he had waited so long to hold in his arms? He was trapped, caught between the unbearable grief of losing his son and the terrifying reality of losing his own life. Figure loomed closer, presence suffocating, as if it were squeezing the very air from Udo's lungs. You must choose now, the figure demanded, voice icy and unforgiving. Decide or we will take both. Udo's mind raced, but he couldn't find an answer, couldn't find a way out. The weight of the decision crushed him, and all he could do was cry out in anguish, knowing that no matter what he chose, he would lose everything. At that moment, Udo's heart nearly stopped. His son, his only son, born just days ago, how could he give him up? The thought alone was enough to tear his heart apart. But the spirits were relentless, their eyes fixed on him, waiting for his answer. I can't, Udo whispered, his voice barely audible. I can't give up my son, take me instead, take my life. The spirits paused, considering his offer. Then, with a slow, deliberate nod, they accepted. So be it, they said in unison, your life, or his. In that instant, Udo felt a cold, searing pain in his chest, as if something was being ripped out of him. He wanted to scream, but no sound came out. His vision blurred, and the last thing he saw before everything went black was the sight of his own lifeless body, lying next to Ani, eyes wide open, staring at nothing. When Ani awoke the next morning, she knew something was wrong. The bed next to her was cold, too cold for someone who had just been sleeping there. She turned to wake Udo, but the moment she saw his face, she froze. His eyes were open, but they were empty. No life, no spark, just a hollow, vacant stare. Panic surged through her, and she let out a scream that echoed through the entire village. The villagers came running. It was too late. Udo was gone, body cold and stiff. The wealth he had acquired, the riches that had once flowed so freely, disappeared as mysteriously as they had come. By the time the sun set that day, Ani was left with nothing but her grief and 3 young daughters to care for, along with her newborn son. As the villagers gathered around, whispering in hushed tones, no one could make sense of what had happened. But in the back of their minds they knew something dark had taken Udo in the dead of night. And whatever it was, it had left a mark, would never be forgotten. After Udo's death, our village was filled with sorrow. People gathered around Ani, offering their condolences, but the weight of her loss was clear in her eyes. Udo had left behind more than just an empty home. He had left a family on the brink of despair. Ani's once lively spirit seemed crushed, and the burden of raising their 4 children alone weighed heavily on her. The wealth that had once filled their lives had vanished, and now they were poorer than ever. Papa Obi, an elderly man who had spent most of his life as a missionary, was the first to step in. He was a kind soul, known throughout the village for his wisdom and gentle nature. Papa Obi had seen many things in his time, and he knew that Ani needed more than just food or money. She needed hope. One evening, just as the sun was setting, Papa Obi visited Ani. The house was quiet, with only the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. Ani was sitting outside, staring blankly at the horizon, her son cradled in her arms. The 3 girls played silently in the yard, their laughter gone with their father. Papa Obi sat down beside Ani without saying a word. For a long time, they both sat there in silence, watching the sky darken. Ani, he began softly, I know your heart is heavy with grief. I know the pain of losing someone you love. There is a way to find peace, even in the midst of such sorrow. Ani looked up at him, her eyes red from crying. How, Papa Obi? How can I find peace when everything I loved has been taken from me? Papa Obi reached out and took her hand. It's not about forgetting your pain, Ani. It's about finding the strength to carry it. There is a place where you can find that strength, a place where you can find hope again. He began to tell Ani about his faith in Christ, about the peace that comes from knowing that even in the darkest times, there is light. Ani listened, not sure if she could believe in anything anymore, but something in Papa Obi's voice comforted her. He wasn't trying to force anything on her. He was offering her a lifeline, something to hold on to in her time of need. Over the next few weeks, Papa Obi continued to visit Ani and her children. He brought them food and prayed with them. Slowly, Ani began to open her heart to the faith Papa Obi shared. It wasn't an easy journey. She had questions, doubts, and fears. Papa Obi was patient, answering her questions and comforting her when she cried. One Sunday, Ani decided to attend the small church where Papa Obi preached. The building was simple, nothing more than a thatched roof and wooden benches, but it was filled with warmth. The villagers welcomed Ani with open arms, offering her words of comfort and support. For the first time since Udo's death, Ani felt a small spark of hope. Papa Obi's sermons were gentle, filled with stories of forgiveness and redemption. He spoke of a love that was greater than any wealth, love that could heal even the deepest wounds. As Ani listened, she began to feel something shift inside her. The pain was still there, but now it was mixed with a growing sense of peace. One evening, as the sun was setting and the village was quiet, Ani made a decision. She knelt down in her small home, surrounded by her children, and prayed for the first time in her life. She prayed for strength, for hope, and for the courage to rebuild her life without Udo. And as she prayed, she felt a warmth in her heart, a small spark of hope that she hadn't felt in a long time. Ani started to rebuild her life, slowly but surely. She found work in the village, doing whatever she could to provide for her children. The villagers rallied around her, helping with the little things that made a big difference. Papa Obi continued to guide her, teaching her how to pray, how to find strength in her faith. And little by little, Ani began to heal. The memory of Udo's death never left her. Lingered in the corners of her mind, a reminder of the dangers of desperation. She knew she had to protect her children from the same darkness that had consumed her husband. She began to teach them the lessons she had learned. the importance of honesty, of hard work, and of never turning to dark forces for help. One night, as Ani sat by the fire with her children, she looked at each of their faces and felt a deep sense of love and responsibility. Udo's story would not end with his death. She would make sure that their children grew up with hope and faith, and that they never repeated the mistakes of the past. The road ahead was still uncertain, and the pain of Udo's loss would never fully disappear. But Ani knew she had found a new strength, one that would carry her through whatever challenges lay ahead. And with that strength came a quiet determination. Keep moving forward, to rebuild her life, and to protect her family from the darkness that once threatened to consume them. Yet deep down, Ani knew that this journey was far from over. There were still questions that haunted her, mysteries that had yet to be unraveled. The spirits that had taken Udo's life, what did they want? And would they ever return? Ani couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. Papa Obi continued to guide her, helping her grow in her faith and find new purpose in life. As time passed, Ani's home, once filled with sorrow, began to fill with laughter again. Her children thrived under her care, and though they would always miss their father, they knew he had sacrificed himself out of love for them. Udo's story became a lesson for the village, a reminder of the dangers of making deals with forces beyond human understanding, but also a story of redemption and hope. In the end, Ani found peace. She understood that life would never be easy, but she also knew that she didn't have to face it alone. She had her faith, her children, and the support of her village. And with that, she knew she could overcome anything. The moral of Ani's story was clear to all who heard it. No matter how desperate life may seem, there is always hope. But that hope comes not from the wealth or power that can be gained through dark means, from the love, faith, and strength that come from within. Thanks for joining us on the African Storybook channel. If you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Click the notification bell so you never miss another captivating story from the heart of Africa.